uh, with us now. Professor Erzsébet Rózsa, who will be speaking today on the Iranian nuclear program from a historical perspective of its development and the current situation with regard to it. Has an MA in Arabic studies. She's also an expert in Iranian studies and English studies. Her PhD was on nuclear non-proliferation, and she's currently professor at the Ludovica University of Public Service in Budapest, and is an academic advisor at the Institute of World Economics. She's an external fellow at the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and her primary field of research actually include the political, security, and social processes in the Middle East, including in Egypt and Iran and Iranian nuclear debate, as well as Euro-Mediterranean cooperation. And I must say that actually we jointly participated not long time ago, what was it, a month ago or a little bit less, in a very interesting seminar conference in Brussels on issues of Middle East, where there were 27 experts from 27 EU member states. And that was when we basically decided and agreed to host and to actually organize this session, knowing that this is a very topical issue, yet we all somehow feel that there are a lot of question marks, mysteries, unknowns, and unknown unknowns perhaps about the topic itself. So what we would actually like to do is to get more information, more knowledge, and a good analysis of what actually is happening with the Iranian nuclear program. Is there such a thing or not? Is it just invented? Or is it real in any serious sense? And if it is, then what kind of security threat it presents and what to do with that? So without further ado, I would actually transfer the floor to Professor Rózsa and welcome her once again on behalf of the Foreign Policy Forum. We will operate in a way that Professor Rózsa will actually show the slides and talk us through and give her own introduction of about half an hour, maybe 40 to 45 minutes most, in the form of a lecture, basically, that will be recorded and then published. And then we will have a debate which will not be recorded and published. It will be more in camera. And I very much look forward to both parts of today's session. So, Erzsébet, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Diane, and thank you all for coming and listening to me. This is a big honor for me. And yes, I am an Arabist and Iranist by training, and as Diane has just mentioned, I did nuclear non-proliferation as well. So this is why we agreed that I would like to speak a little bit to you on the Iranian nuclear program issue, whatever can be known and whatever the context of it historically is, and what we know and where we stand today. Can I have my slides, please, because I cannot see. Thank you, Dan. So in the beginning, of course, Iran is in the Middle East, and the Middle East is home, among other things, to the caricatures, which are always, there are always a lot of caricatures. So first, I would like to speak a little bit about the context. So can you please go to slide 2? I am not sure if all of you are exactly clear, although I think you are, where Iran is situated, located. So just I put in here the map, which when we come later to the war between Iran and Israel, you will see the distance. But I would like to start with slide number 3. Slide number 3. Dan, slide number 3. Can we go further? Yes. First of all, I would like to say a few things about the Islamic Republic of Iran, which came into being as the result of the 1979 revolution. What is Iran's self-perception? Because when you speak about foreign policy or when you speak about military-related or dual-use programs, it is always important what are the starting points of that state. Now, for Iran, there is a very, very strong sense of being an ancient power and an ancient civilization. But it also prides itself as a modern power. And what can we see in modernity? Obviously, when we are speaking about modernity, everyone straight at once thinks of technology and industry. And yes, of course, Iran considers itself as a modern power from a technological point of view. Just think of its arms industry, how the Russians are dependent or were dependent for a while on the Iranian drones that were sent to them in the course of the war in Ukraine. They want to have nuclear energy, but they are also politically a modern state in the sense that they have institutions, some of which you cannot even find in the Middle East at all, which were made modern in Europe. These were developed in Europe, the form of the republic. Who would have thought that after the revolution they would go for a republic? And this kind of European innovation. They have a parliament and they have elections, whatever failures there can be with that. But Iran considers itself also a responsible power. It rejects foreign interference, it supports the poor, the needy. You may say that, okay, that goes with it being a Shiite Islamic state, but it also often calls for disarmament in the different international fora. Can we go on? So what is the basis of Iran's strategic calculation? First of all, Iran it sees itself that it is surrounded by foreign military presence. And this was the result not only of the Iran-Iraq war in 1980-88, but mostly after the 2003 Iraq war. And in spite of the Iraq war, that the United States and its allies, its international allies, uh, did regime change in Iraq, the Iranians, even at the time, were saying that, oh, no, the real target is us. So I remember 1 week before the Iraqi war started in 2003, and foreign minister at the time, Kamal Kharazi, came and he was giving a talk. Whatever the Americans are doing, the real target is us. And we also have to say that after the Iraq war, after the 2003 Iraq war, if you looked around in the map and you really saw American or other foreign international military forces all around in the neighborhood of Iran. So they did have this concept and it is still very strong with them. Plus, it didn't help either that the United States time and again speaks of promoting regime change in Iran. Even now, even this year, we could hear it from President Trump that regime change is on the agenda, but it was regularly on and off the agenda. There were US presidents, for example, during Bill Clinton, there was separate title in the US budget to regime change in Iran. And now we see, I don't know if you have seen him, if you paid attention, but during the war with Israel and the tensions with Israel, the son of the late Shah Reza Pahlavi appeared in the United States again and again, calling for regime change, even visiting Israel and even speaking together with Benjamin Netanyahu, regime change in Iran. And we also have to take into account that when Iran looked around, he found that when the US wanted regime change, the US carried it out. The US wanted regime change in Talib Afghanistan, 2001, it carried it out. The US wanted regime change, that Afghanistan is the eastern neighbor, the US wanted regime change in western neighbor Iraq, and it carried it out. So this is more than enough for Iran to be very, very cautious in its strategic calculation. Therefore, the basis of the strategic calculation is deterrence. Now, in deterrence, there are three elements which are usually raised when anyone on the international fora discusses Iran. One is the nuclear program, one is the missile program, and one is Iran's regional politics. And whenever we listen to Iran up to the end of last year, probably, we could hear that the nuclear program is negotiable. Iran has been negotiating on nuclear issue going back ever since the year 2002, when it was first detected that Iran did have something unannounced, did have a nuclear program, an element of the nuclear program unannounced. So they started negotiating. The nuclear program has always been negotiable, in spite of the fact that at this precise moment, the talks are suspended. And then we have the stories of the sanctions. I will come to that later. The missile program, however, is non-negotiable. This is an element in Iranian deterrence perception that cannot be negotiated, and one reason is not only that they are surrounded by foreign military presence in the neighborhood, but also that in the neighborhood, in the closer and wider neighborhood, there are several countries which do have missile capabilities, either of their own capability or they have it both from the United States or with foreign support and so on. And the third one is Iran's regional politics. And maybe you have heard this phrase, axis of resistance or the axis of evil. This is a network of, not really a network, a very loose belonging together or talking to each other of different armed groups, usually non-state actors, although there was a state actor, Syria as well. So this is what the king of Jordan, Abdullah, called at one point the Shiite crescent, but it is not a correct explanation because not all the elements are Shiite. So they rather like to call it, the Iranians themselves like to refer to it, the axis of resistance. Now, after the war with Israel, this very short 12-day war with Israel, we see that, and these past 2 years, we see that this network is very, very much weakened. And even when it was at its prime, it was not Iran who was dictating. So it was not like a NATO-like alliance. It was not that Ayatollah Khamenei woke up one morning in Tehran and said, good idea that someone from the network attacks Israel. It was not operating like this, but there were different groups who received Iranian support, sometimes money, sometimes weapons, sometimes training. They accepted it and they were doing what they themselves wanted to do. But time and again, when there was they had the same interest, they may have they may have acted together with Iran. So these are the three elements, but these belong to the strategic calculation of deterrence on the Iranian side. And this regional politics, this regional axis of resistance is also non-negotiable. We may say that today this axis of resistance is very, very much weakened, but the thing is that all the actors that were involved are still in their place. Maybe they are not that strong, or maybe they do not listen to Iran that much, but they are still there. And for the local actors, they are still a threat. And then we also have to take into consideration when speaking about Iran's strategic calculation that they have introduced a look to the East policy already in the late 90s. Look to the East, basically meaning China and Russia. Why? Because the West was so much against and was isolating Iran. So this is what they were doing. And what we see nowadays is that Iran has also started to depend more on its neighborhood and started to develop relations with its direct neighborhood, but still Iran considers itself strategically lonely, standing alone. Iran has no real allies. So the next one, please. And here we go, I think we go over to, no, yes. Here I put in a slide a very brief, very short historical overlook, okay, how it is between Iran and the United States. Here I have to mention that the United States was a relative latecomer to Iran. In fact, the Western power that did have closer relations with Iran typically and historically used to be the Brits, the United Kingdom, and the Iranian relations were not very good, but when the United Kingdom, after the Suez Crisis, withdrew from the Middle East, withdrew its positions to the east from Suez, and it already started in the 50s, then the Americans quietly appeared. And the Iranians still remember very well that in 1953, when the position of the Shah at the time, it was already Reza Pahlavi, became a little bit uncertain. There was an elected parliament, elected government, and the head of the government, Mohammad Mossadegh, proposed that we should put an end to foreigners using our oil resources. So we should nationalize our oil resources. And it was at the time that the CIA, together with the MI5, arranged a coup d'etat against this prime minister. Again, I say democratically elected prime minister. And this was the end of the restoration of the Shah for the first time. Then a big moment is that in that Christmas 1977, US President Carter with his wife was visiting the Shah in Iran. And everyone remembers who is dealing with this, his speech that Iran is the strongest bastion of the United States in the Middle East. 1 year later, or a little bit more than 1 year later, the Islamic Revolution terminated once and for all the monarchy in Iran. And the revolution started in February 1979. Now, from February to November in 1979, the United States was in a waiting position. They were thinking, okay, there is a revolution, let's wait and see, and then when the end result is there, we will start with whoever comes into power, we will restart our relations with Iran. But this was not what happened, because on November the 4th, the US Embassy in Tehran was attacked by revolutionary students who got altogether 52 hostages, and they were held in custody for 444 days. The Iranians love symbolism, by the way, so 444 days, and they were released, these hostages were released during the inauguration speech of Ronald Reagan. The Iranians up today are convinced that President Jimmy Carter lost the election to Ronald Reagan because of this because of this hostage crisis that were happening in Iran. There was an operation when the U.S. wanted to get the hostages out of Iran. It failed. So the Iranians symbolically released the hostages during the inauguration speech of Ronald Reagan. There is even a film on that, and it's very interesting that in the film, in the car, Carter and Reagan are going to the inauguration of the new president, and then Carter always is on the phone and asking that, are they out? Are they free yet? No, not yet. So during the speech, and since then, the United States was considered, since the revolution, the United States was considered in Iran the great Satan. The small Satan obviously is Israel. And then in 2002, in his famous speech in January, George W. Bush was speaking about the axis of evil, into which axis he included Iran. So from the Iranian side, the US is the great Satan. From the US side, Iran is the axis of evil. Okay, so next slide, please. And if we look now at Iran in the Middle East, as I said, it is a lonely regional power, although it has developed, looking east, relations with Russia, India, and China. The Iranians are very much aware that these relations are dependent on these countries' relations with the United States. So should Russia and the United States come together, not at this precise moment, in spite of President Trump's trying to do that, then the Iranians are aware that the Russians would leave them behind. The same goes with China. Should the US come together with China, the Iranians would lose a lot of relevance, not lost altogether because China is dependent on Iranian oil, and the same goes for India. So this is very much, the Iranians are very much aware, and what we have seen here, that Russia didn't come to help Iran, even in the United Nations, China didn't come to help Iran, and so on and so forth. So they feel themselves justified. Iran, however, as I said, considers itself a regional power and a constructivist power, I think also a pragmatic power. And here, this is the sentence which I would like to draw your attention to. What is the aim of the Iranian leadership? The maintenance and the survival of this very, very specific model, which is based on Shiite Islam, which is called Velayat al-Faqih, and everything is done to maintain and have this model survive. So this is why they would sit down to negotiate when they think that their model is threatened. This is when they would try to go to war. This is, by the way, they don't go to war, they react. For the past more than 200 years, Iran has never started a war. It reacted to when it was attacked. It doesn't, everything is about the maintenance and the survival of this model, which was established by Ayatollah Khomeini, and ever since his death in 1989, it is taken on by Ayatollah Khamenei, who is also rather old, 86 or 87 this year, I think, and he is already thinking of leaving this behind as his heritage. So everything should always be seen through this lens. And this is the one and only thing. Yes, next, please. I think here we go over to the nuclear. Yes, I think, I don't know if you are familiar with the nuclear fuel cycle. I don't know. Anyone in the nuclear fuel cycle? Anyone knows that? I don't know what is the background of the people who are here with us. So, okay. So what we call a fuel cycle, a nuclear fuel cycle, is that from the mining of the uranium ore, how can you reach either the civilian use or the military use of uranium? And this is, you see what is encircled in red. These are the two proliferation threats. These are the two technologies, the two phases where one can go, yes, now it's better, thank you very much, now it's bigger. It is uranium enrichment. If no one is in the knowledge of this, just very briefly, a nuclear weapon.
We're actually not. No, I don't think anyone here is an expert.
Okay, then maybe a few minutes, just so that, okay. So a nuclear weapon or anything that is nuclear is dual use, which means that it will depend on the political will, how you use it, on the political will of the state, how you use it, if you use it for civilian use or if you use it militarily. So the political will is the thing. However, everything that is, yes, the nuclear issues, nuclear processes, nuclear technologies are based either on nuclear fission, where you split the nucleus. This can be done with uranium or with plutonium, or with nuclear fusion. This you can do with hydrogen. This is a more elevated technology. Nuclear fission, so the basic material is either uranium or plutonium, but plutonium you don't find on the globe ever. Plutonium is a byproduct if you are doing something with uranium in a reactor in a nuclear process, then plutonium is in the spent fuel, is a byproduct that can be there. Now, the big thing is that if you want to use uranium for civilian uses, nowadays we say there are several isotopes of the uranium, but the best one that you can use is U-235. But when you go to the mine, uranium mine, and you do mining, in the uranium ore, you find this only in 0.7%. However, to most of the technologies that we use nowadays, you need a bit more. This is why you have to enrich. You have to increase the presence of U-235 into a bigger level. We say that nowadays with our technologies, our civilian technologies, under 5% is fine. So if you are under 5%, then you can prepare nuclear fuel or you can use it for other things. For example, would you believe it that when you want to transfer potato from one end of the world to the other end, it will grow these things, these roots out of it, right? So they use a little bit of irradiation, and then it will remain perfect. So there are several uses, not just nuclear, not just the nuclear power plants, but obviously generating nuclear energy. That is the most visible civilian use of nuclear energy. However, if you go on enriching and you reach 20%, even today, there are still technologies where they need 20% enriched uranium. Like in Iran, they produce at the Tehran Research Reactor, at the university, they produce medical isotopes with which they treat every year, I don't know, 80,000 cancerous diseases. So this is also civilian use. Although it is 20%, we do not like nowadays. We like it to keep it under 5%, but at the moment this technology is 20%. But if you increase the percentage of the U-235, then when you reach 90%, then it is called weapon grade. Because this is the thing, if you have 90% enriched uranium, that is already weapon grade. There is no other use to it nowadays than a weapon. So far, so good. But in the reactor, in the spent fuel, as I said, there is a byproduct among many other things, which is plutonium. Now, the thing is that as you can enrich uranium, you can dilute it. So it's relatively easy. I don't say it's easy for you, Diane, or for me, but I mean, it's relatively easy. You can dilute it. And if you have enriched it to a high percentage, but now you change your mind and you do not want to have weapons, you can dilute it and use it for civilian purposes. The thing is different with plutonium. With plutonium, in however quality it is, plutonium can be used for weapons. And the bad thing is that you cannot get rid of plutonium. So for example, the Japanese have now several tons of plutonium separated. They separate it from the spent fuel. They thought that maybe they could have civilian use for it, but nowadays there is an agreement that if you separate plutonium, you can only want weapons. And the bad thing is that you cannot get rid of it. They try to have technologies. Okay, then we put the plutonium in a reactor, we burn it, and then we get rid of it. The problem is that there would be more plutonium coming out at the end than what you put it at the beginning. And the problem with the plutonium is you don't know how to store it, because the halving life of plutonium is 24,000 years. I cannot wait till it gets halved and till it becomes harmless. So we don't know what to do. This is why plutonium, when someone is thinking about plutonium, then the international community becomes nervous and says no. And then, obviously, I said I would not like to speak about the hydrogen, but that's a different type of a weapon. But now let's stay here. And this is why when we are drawing up the nuclear fuel cycle, this is why we always draw up uranium. And there is no mention of plutonium. Can we go to the next slide, please? I will talk very long, Diane. I will talk very long. Next slide, please. Yes. So the Iranian nuclear program here I already mentioned modernity. Nowadays, many countries think that it is an indispensable element of a regional power status that you have maybe not nuclear weapons, but you have a nuclear program, a civilian nuclear program. If you look around in the Middle East, frankly speaking, Iraq did have a civilian and also a military program. Now they are stripped of it after the 2003 war. And then Israel and no one else. Not even the civilian program do they have it. So Iran, when it has the civilian program, is already entitled to one more element of being a regional power. As I said, the nuclear fuel cycle is dual use, and we also have to mention that we have, ever since 1968, we have the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which gives the right to each and every party to the treaty to have a civilian program under the inspection of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And this is also Iran's right under the NPT, as long as they were proven to have developed nuclear weapons, as long as they were clearly proven that they are working on nuclear weapons, they have the right under the NPT to have a nuclear program. Obviously, we can say that, yes, but you can step over. Yes, but so far no one could prove that they were doing the military. They were going military. Plus, there is Ayatollah Khamenei, who in 2005 edited a nuclear fatwa. A fatwa is a Shiite religious decree which is obligatory for everyone. Since in the Islamic Republic of Iran, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is the person who is interpreting divine law according to the Iranian constitution. The lawmaker in Iran is God himself. Ayatollah Khamenei explains it because he is qualified to do that. So when he issues a nuclear fatwa, then it is really serious. I do not say that it couldn't be cheated at all, but I would say that that would cause a lot of trouble. Why? Because then the one and only aim of the Islamic Republic, the maintenance of the model, would be harmed, would fail. So it would threaten the survival of the regime. It would be such a big shame that it cannot be maintained. And then how this was the reason why when in 2002 it was announced by some opposition Iranian organization that Iran has conducted no, it's not a military, sorry, has conducted the construction of nuclear sites as yet unannounced to the IAEA, that this was the reason why Khamenei, on the one hand, issued this fatwa, and on the other hand, that Iran started to negotiate. Straight at once they started to negotiate, and straight at once when these opposition forces made this announcement about two sites in Natanz and in Arak, that there are two sites in the process of being built. not yet nuclear material in it, only building, preparing the sites, straight at once the Iranians announced it officially to the IAEA, and then they are okay, because this is what they have to do under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So the next one, please. In 1968, Iran joined the NPT as a non-nuclear weapon state, and in 1970, it ratified the treaty as well. According to the treaty, non-nuclear weapon state parties to the treaty have to conclude a bilateral so-called full-scope safeguards agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency. This means that the International Atomic Energy Agency, the inspectors that the country prepares a list. What do I have? I have here a laboratorium working on that. I have the Tehran research reactor where we are producing medical isotopes and so on. And this is the basis of the inspections, and the inspectors are coming regularly and they are inspecting the sites, having cameras on spot, looking at all the minutes, all the records that are done, what is going on, checking the spent fuel, for example, if it is properly done, and so on, if there was no plutonium extracted from the spent fuel. By the way, the North Koreans were caught red-handed with that. The inspectors went to visit the North Korean site. They were checking the spent fuel, and they didn't find plutonium in it. And they asked, where is the plutonium? The North Koreans said, we don't know. But it is being produced. Maybe this time it was not produced. So this was how the North Koreans were caught red-handed. The Iranians were never caught red-handed. So this full-scope safeguards agreement was concluded with the IAEA. And then in the 1970s, so before the revolution started, this was all in the Shah's era, before 79. In the 1970s, the Iranian Shah ordered an international consortium led by the Siemens Kraftwerk Union, by the way, to build the first nuclear power plant in Iran. And he had a plan that by the turn of the century, there would be 20 other nuclear power plants operating in Iran. But then the Islamic Revolution came, and Ayatollah Khomeini suspended the program, closed down the program. He forbid to go on further with nuclear research, whatever stage it was at the time. Interestingly, and during the Iraq-Iran War, 1980-88, at some time in the mid-80s, the Iranians restarted their nuclear program. And they also, and after the Iraqi war, after 88, when they pulled themselves together, it was a very horrible war for Iran. When they pulled themselves together, the Western consortium could not come back because of Iraq, what the international community found in Iraq about the Iraqi nuclear program. So they made all the regulations much stricter. So they couldn't come back to Iran. So the Iranians turned to Russia, and they made an agreement with Russia to go on and finish this Bushehr nuclear power plant, civilian use. And it took a lot of time. So it took till 2012 till the Bushehr nuclear reactor was connected to the national grid and has been producing energy, electricity through the national grid in Iran. And then much later, in the Iranians and the Russians agreed to build a second one. This is called Bushehr 2, and the construction started in 2019, but it is going on very slowly. So this was the one and only, and so far in operation, Bushehr nuclear power plant in Iran. Of course, there were many questions. Why does a country which is running knee-deep in oil need nuclear energy? The answer from the Iranian side was very easy, because we want to sell our oil. And nuclear energy is much, much, much cheaper, mind you, only when the nuclear power plant is already built and it is in operation, and you don't have to take care of its closing it down finally. So while it is in operation, it really does produce a much cheaper energy than any other power plant. I mentioned it already that so far so good, everything was going on in Iran under the IAEA inspection, but then in 2002, this opposition announcement came about these two sites, Natanz and Arak. I will show you on the map on the next slide. I think we can go further. Negotiations started, and then straight at once in 2007, another site was announced, that another site was built. Here you see Natanz is practically in the middle, almost in the. You see in the black squares. This is where they put first together the uranium enrichment plant in huge caves in a huge mountain. They made the place. They enlarged the caves and made it possible for there to host uranium centrifuges for the uranium enrichment. So this was the first uranium enrichment plant. But then later on, if you look a little bit northeast, where there you see Qom, which is a religious center as well, and there they later on they built a much smaller one, and this is the one which is deep down, 80-meter deep down in rocks, which even the bunker busters could not reach. So when you what you see is that there are several places all around the country, even more places, minor, only loosely related to the nuclear program. They learned from Iraq, you should not concentrate everything in one place. And here you see that I listed it on the side, what they were doing. They can produce their own fuel, although for the Bushehr nuclear power plant, they are still importing nuclear fuel from Russia, and they are sending the spent fuel back to Russia, which was a very good agreement from the proliferation point of view. So now Iran does have all the nuclear fuel cycle. Let's go further because I'm speaking too long, but I still have a lot of things today to say. And then as the negotiations started from 2002, it was not very easy. And Iran, and in the end, the United Nations Security Council was also involved. The UN Security Council passed 4 times resolutions, sanctions against Iran, and these were first very simple. We don't give visa to 3 high-ranking politicians, and then what, right? So these were first very simple, but the last one in 2010, that was very much binding because it aimed at the oil and gas export, it aimed at the banking system. So they cannot use the SWIFT, for example, anymore to transfer money, and there was also a weapons embargo. However, when you look at the sanction system against Iran or on Iran, it is not just the UN Security Council obligatory sanctions, but there was unilateral sanctions by different countries. First of all, the United States from the very beginning of from the first year of the Islamic Revolution, also other countries, and there were also sanctions in different other topics, human rights and so on, things like that. So when you look at it, when we are speaking about sanctions on Iran, we usually think of the nuclear sanctions, nuclear-related sanctions, but it is much more. So let's go on. Let's go on. And the negotiations started, and you also know that in 2015, we came to the nuclear deal, which is the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Mind you, this is not a treaty, this is a plan of action. Very important. And the main negotiators were the E3, who started first to negotiate with Iran, Britain, France, Germany. At one point, the European Union stepped in, plus 3, US, Russia, China. So this is why the Europeans like to call it E3 plus 3 and Iran. Generally, globally, they call it P5, 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, plus 1, which is Germany, and Iran. And let's go further. We came to the conclusion of this JCPOA. It was great. Obama said it was a good agreement. Zarif, who was the Iranian foreign minister, said it is a historical agreement. It is a very technical document, some 80 pages. There are some elements. There are segments which we call sunset clauses, that this part is valid for 10 years, that for 15 years, that for 25 years. The Iranians had to undertake what not to do for 10 years or 15 years or 25 years. And Obama said that should Iran decide to develop nuclear weapons, instead of 2-3 months that they were thinking it would take to Iran, it would be over a year. So we pushed this timeline out, and Obama said that both routes were cut by the different elements within the nuclear deal. The uranium route, because Iran had to give up highly enriched uranium, couldn't have highly enriched uranium, okay, diluted, fine. The level of uranium enrichment was agreed at 3.67%. The number of the centrifuges, at that time Iran already had 19,000 centrifuges operating, different level, different technical level. They brought it down to 6,000. And then this new site at Qom, it is called Fordo. It can only be used for research. The plutonium route was also cut for a long while. Iran promised that for 15 years it will not build anything that is plutonium fueled. Plus, Iran agreed to sign and implement the so-called additional protocol, which means that practically, in a very simple way, it means that anyone, anytime may come in and look what we are doing here. Next slide, please. This is just a slide showing what were cut by the JCPOA. So let's go further. Can I still go on, Diane? It's long, I know, but
Yeah, sure. I mean, until the end, but I mean, just,
okay.
I suppose it's what, 10 minutes?
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I am trying to. I am coming. Okay.
No problem.
You may know that in 2018, President Donald Trump withdrew the United States unilaterally from the JCPOA. It also has to be mentioned that when the JCPOA was passed in 2015, and by the way, this is up to date, the one and only real foreign policy success of the European Union, because it was in the end the European Union who was negotiating until President Trump spoiled it all for us. And but after, when the JCPOA was agreed and announced, very soon, 1 week after, the United Nations Security Council also passed a resolution unanimously about accepting this deal. And here there is some legal uncertainties, how it is, who is it, because when Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, he forgot to withdraw from the Security Council resolution. So it's not very clear. For 1 year, the Iranians were practicing strategic patience. They were fulfilling everything that they undertook under the JCPOA, and they were hoping that the others would come back, but no one came back because President Trump introduced new, even more sanctions, and even secondary sanctions, meaning that anyone who dealt with Iran would be sanctions in the United States. So the Iranians were trying for 1 year to behave nicely and well, but then after a year, symbolically, really day by day, 1 year, they went into two directions. One was stepping away from the contents of the deal. They did it 5 times, 6 times. Every time they announced it well before. We are going to step away from this. When first they said, okay, we will raise the quantity of heavy water from this amount to that amount, and then what heavy water in itself is not a problem. It's the moderator that can be used in a process. But in the sixth step, they announced that we are going to enrich to 60%. Now, 60%, what for? I will come back to the 60% problematic. Always pre-announced, always said that this can be turned back, but no one came back. The other thing that they started to do, they started to have planned and well-calculated actions on mostly in the Persian Gulf. We also have to say that it was not only the Iranians who were taking hold of foreign ships, but also the others were trying to take hold of Iranian ships, and so on and so forth. So they started to do this, always calculating that it shouldn't escalate into a war. Always, always. Next slide, please. We are coming to where we are today. So afterwards, you can watch these caricatures. I sent it to everyone so you can have it. So next slide, please. I think I have like 3 more or so, 4 more, I don't know, something, a little bit more. Then in February 2025, an IAEA, International Atomic Agency report came out, and in the follow-up, of course, negotiations going on, struggling with each other going on, the report said that there are still 3 undeclared locations in Iran where the agency found uranium particles. Although this belonged to the past, but they were still demanding Iran to answer, to say where they come from. These are the names of the 3 sites, and these were storage of nuclear material and equipment. These were undeclared pilot scale plant, all belonging to the past, all belonging to 2003 or even before, but the IAEA claimed that Iran has not ever said that what was it doing there. So let's go to the next slide, because then the outstanding problems that were put in this report was that there is a discrepancy. Whatever the Iranians were announcing, there was a discrepancy in nuclear material balance, and they did not announce what they should have announced to inform the agency about certain things. And as the situation became worse and worse, Iran withdrew the designation of several experienced agency inspectors, so they didn't give them visas and so on and so forth. However, there were also positive elements. The agency verified at Fordo the fuel and so on, and Natanz, and let's go even further. And then we came to June 12. In June 12, in the IAEA, the Board of Governors passed a resolution. And the resolution said, for the first time in 20 years, it said explicitly that Iran is in non-compliance with its nuclear non-proliferation obligations. Undeclared nuclear material, as said in the previous slide, and lack of cooperation. Iran was suspending or decreasing certain aspects of cooperation with the IAEA inspectors. Naturally, Iran condemned this resolution and even announced plans to build a new uranium enrichment plant. Well, this is what Iran should do if it, according to the IAEA and according to the full scope safeguards. So in this way, Iran was doing right, but we don't know much about this new site as yet. However, there was also concern reflected in the IAEA decision that if Iran can establish a centrifuge capacity, then this 800 kilogram of highly enriched uranium, the 60% uranium, would be enough for 9-10 nuclear weapons they can be further enriched, and this could be enough for nuclear weapons. The Iranians were saying all along that we do not want nuclear weapons. We are not going for nuclear weapons. Whether you believe them or not, that's another issue. And what was very interesting, that June 12th came the IAEA Board of Governors decision, and on the next day, Israel attacked Iran, and the 12-day war started. If we go further to see the 12-day war, I am sure that you know that this was the first open war ever between Iran and Israel. The two countries are separated by more than 1,000 kilometers land, but there were antecedents to this. There were regular sabotage actions in Iran, one of the nuclear sites, computers went wrong. There were regular attacks on nuclear scientists and also others, and these were usually led back to Israel, and Israel usually does not deny it. These were covered operations, this happened in Iran, Iranian territory, and then in 2023, there was an attack, as Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus. So the situation became tenser and tenser, and the first direct exchanges ever between Israel and Iran happened in 2024. And now the 12-day war started. There were huge problems. On the one hand, Iran was negotiating with the United States, and the next round of the meeting was set, I think, on the 15th of June in Doha. And then on the 13th of June, Israel attacked Iran. There was a lot of calculations at the time that maybe this is the way how Israel wants to deter the United States from coming to a conclusion or even just from negotiation with Iran. We don't know whether it is true or not, but we do know that at some point the United States joined Israel. There was Donald Trump's announcement that we have had a spectacular military success. Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated, which is not the case, so it seems, although even today we don't know really enough what happened or how much damage has been done. And then in these Israeli strikes against Iran, there were at least 14 nuclear scientists killed again. Of course, nuclear processes are not happening out of themselves. There must be people who are doing it, but there were also civilian people who died in these attacks. However, from this Israeli-Iran 12-day war, two very important results came out, or lessons. On the one hand, however much Israel attacked Iran, Iran always had the strike back capability. Iran could always strike back with some missiles, drones, whatever. This was strange because the Israelis went for the Iranian missiles as well. I have the next map which will show it to you. The other thing was, and in the meanwhile we can change the slides, the other thing was that in spite of the huge efforts on the Israeli side to have these different air defense systems, some Iranian missiles could still get through. Now on this map you see that there were missile facilities. The red ones are the missile facilities, the yellow ones are the nuclear facilities that the Israelis were attacking. And if we go further to the next slide, you will see the sites. There is another map where here on the Iranian side you see these three red dots that designate the attack of the US strikes on the 22nd of June. There were two sites, Fordo, where I said that there was 80-meter deep rock, very hard rock, which even the bunker busters could not really reach. So they say that there were 12 such bombs drop down, and even they will drop down one after the other, everyone going deeper than the other, so they were going down, 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 but in fact they couldn't reach the core, so they say. Obviously the entrances as some tunnels obviously were badly hit. Then there is Natanz, which was also hit by the United States. This is where I told you that in the caves of the mountains there were the centrifuges that were put. And then there was also Isfahan, which is the southernmost of the red dots. This is where the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center is operating, and this is where they convert uranium into a material to be fed into the uranium centrifuges. And on the Israeli side, you see where the Iranians hit the Israeli ground. And then we go further. 2 more slides. Then we go further. And now what we see is that in August this year, the E3, UK, Germany, France, triggered the so-called snapback mechanism. Now, the snapback mechanism is a mechanism that was put into the JCPOA, which says that if any member says that another member is in non-compliance, then we can initiate this snapback mechanism, and like a mousetrap, it will come back. And while the sanctions were suspended on Iran, now the sanctions will be brought back. And this is the snapback mechanism in a very simple way. The E3 were adamant that they want to have the snapback mechanism back because Iran produced too much enriched uranium, they said, the 60%. Iran was not providing access to international inspectors, and there were no direct and unconditional negotiations with the United States. Now, within the United Nations Security Council, Russia and China wanted to help Iran and wanted to expand this period with 30 days so that there should be more time for negotiations. However, we also have to say that the Iranians cannot really trust. Ayatollah Khamenei never trusts the United States. But they cannot really trust. I mean, we are sitting down to negotiate. You let Israel attack us, and you even join Israel in attacking us, then how can we believe you? So the last slide would be, the last but one. The last slide would be, last slide. Yes, what will the Iranians do? First, we have to say that we do not know where is this 400 kilograms, 60% enriched uranium. We do not know. Many people think that the bombs that were bombed down there closed it down and it is still somewhere there deep inside underground. Maybe yes, maybe no. We don't know. If the Iranians took it away, where did they take it? It was relatively unexpected that the US, I mean, when you are sitting down in 2 days' time with the US, you do not expect that the US will bomb you. So I don't know. Practically no one at the moment knows where is this material. We also do not know, or at least I haven't seen it yet, where this already announced third site would be that the Iranians are speaking about constructing, but there are rumors that it would be even deeper ground underneath. We also see that now the Western powers, not just the United States, are demanding that the discussion should cover not only the nuclear issue, but missiles and regional policy issues as well. This was the issue when the JCPOA was started to be negotiated, but Obama and the Iranians saw that one thing first. So let's discuss the nuclear, then build trust, then step forward. Now, there is such a demand. I don't think that the Iranians will ever come to the table with this. Khamenei says that he has no trust in the United States, has never had, by the way, but in his calculation, the urgency, the need to maintain the model was always stronger, and this is why negotiations were there. So maybe even now this will be the case. And in fact, it will depend on three factors what the Iranians are going to do. On the one hand, decision-making in Iran itself, the political will, but there has been changes in the structure, in the administrative structure of handling these issues, but as yet it is still the same system. It is still Khamenei who, at least in principle, says the last word. Whether the strikes can force Iran to the negotiating table, what we saw is that during the war, in spite of the calls on the Iranian people to stand up against the regime, the people said, no, we are defending our homeland. And we say, we postpone our anger against the regime. So the Iranians are a nation in a European sense. They stand up together when they are attacked. Whether we like it or not, this slogan that, sack your own regime, send them away, this will not work. And then obviously on the Israeli side, what is happening in Israel? There is Gaza, there is the internal problems and so on. But we, as the international community, are facing a big question. Can we accept a success of military counter-proliferation over the diplomatic or political efforts? I am not sure. The international community was not built up after the Second World War like this, and we shouldn't forget that next year we are going for the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference. So I think that there will be a lot of discussion on that. And we should also not forget that Iran is still a party to the NPT, and my belief and conviction is that it serves the maintenance of the regime, of the model, better. So my last slide, please, Diane, if you can help me with that. I would like to thank you for your attention. That's me in Iran, by the way, if you have any doubt. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Erzsebet, for this comprehensive, very useful.
Too long.
Actually, that answered some of my initial questions, and I'm pretty much sure will be very much helpful, both for those who are experts and who follow these events professionally, but also, for example, for students. I mean, those who really need to get some framework and major information really about the topic itself.